Hey there, beloved. My name is Will Dickinson, and I serve as curate at St. George's Episcopal Church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. We're starting out a new, well, I hope it'll be a series called Sermons from the Living Room. This came about because, as many of you know, this past Sunday, between technical difficulties and the wind, it was kind of hard to hear. And I had the gall to think that the sermon I wrote was worthy of your hearing. And I thought back to the beginning of the pandemic when all of us were preaching from our living rooms, and I just thought, that was kind of intimate, that was kind of nice, let's get back to that. So, here we go. So, our gospel this week is chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew. It's verses 14 through 30, sort of maybe infamously known as the parable of the talents. And a talent is just sort of coin, it's currency. The long and short of it is that a man leaves three different amounts of money to three servants of his. One five, one two, and the last one he gives one. And the first two, while he's gone, go and make more money with what they invested. They use their ingenuity to take care of that money, and they end up doubling it. And the last servant goes and buries his to keep it safe. And when the man comes back, he takes a look at the first two, sees what they've done with what's been given to them, and praises them and says, "Come, celebrate with me. I'll give you charge over even more than that." And the last servant, the one who only buried it, he says, "You wicked and lazy slave," or servant, and casts him into the outer darkness. It's kind of a lot. And I'll just come out and say it, like, oof. It's my first reaction to that, just oof. It's pretty heavy. It's not quite a get them on their feet and the crowd goes wild kind of gospel. Now take this worthless servant and throw him into the farthest darkness, is what that man purportedly says as Jesus is telling this parable. And one has to wonder, like, did anyone tell Jesus about how 2020 is going? I mean, how about we go back to the Sermon on the Mount? You know, the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. That seems much more relevant. That seems kinder. I mean, like, come on, Jesus, read the room. But that's not usually what happens, is it? The gospel contains all kinds of things, all kinds of truths that we would rather not hear. Now, long, long ago, in February, which sort of feels like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years back, but back in February, I preached a sermon up north on that passage in John where Jesus is in the temple and he overturns the tables of the money changers and drives out the livestock because the money changers were profiting off of the worship of God, and that made Jesus quite angry. It's kind of a confusing passage. It's a hard passage, and Jesus is very upset in a way that we don't often see. And when I say that I preached on it, I really didn't. I preached on the epistle that day instead. And after what I'm hoping was an eloquent and helpful sermon, I was sitting at coffee hour with an 8-year-old named Liam. And he was halfway through a glazed donut, half the size of his face, when he said to me, "You know, I kind of like angry Jesus. Sort of reminds us that this is a big deal." Well, I don't know what's going on in your life, Liam, but I agree. It's about the most theologically profound thing I've heard all year. I don't know about y'all, but I sometimes fall into this spell of thinking of Jesus as one thing. You know, oh, Jesus was just kind. You know, if only I could be kind like Jesus. Or he was so compassionate. If only I could be compassionate like Jesus. Or that classic mid-century, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. And sure, like, he was all of those things, but he was so much more than that. He was never just one thing. He got angry, like he did in the temple that day. He could be a bit scary, like on the mountaintop with Peter and the other disciples when he was transfigured. And he could get overwhelmed as well, like in the Garden of Gethsemane when he asks, God the Father to take this cup from him. And I like it when he bursts out of that box that I put him in. I like when Jesus sounds more like God than Bono, if you know what I mean. I like it because it reminds me that God is God. That I don't have to understand God all of the time, but I always have something more to learn. And so I have to wonder, what is there to learn from our gospel reading today? What do we do with this story? So at this point, you could be forgiven for forgetting this, but starting 2 chapters ago, Jesus is talking with the disciples on the Mount of Olives, and he's responding to a question that one of them raises, which is, Lord, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? They're asking, how do we prepare for your return? What will the coming kingdom look like? And Jesus answers, as usual, not with a straight answer, but a series of illustrations, each more dramatic than the next. And last week, we heard about those bridesmaids, some of whom had done the work to prepare for the wedding feast. They had enough oil in their lamps. And some of whom were not prepared, hadn't done the work, and hadn't put in the time. And they ran out of light in their lamps, and they weren't there when the groom arrived, and the door was shut to them. Now, thankfully, we at St. George's have a very competent altar guild, so usually our lamps are pretty well stocked. But regardless, this is a difficult teaching too. It seems kind of exclusive. It seems demanding in a way that peace and love Jesus that we sometimes hear about doesn't. But this is also a Jesus who speaks to a more complex world. Because peace and love Jesus works well when everything's going great, but what about when the world demands more of us? What about when it seems more complicated? And that's the Jesus we're given, is the one who speaks to all of that. And so to that end, we hear Jesus teaching today about a person who tasks his servants with caring for his belongings while he takes a trip. And that last servant who goes and buries that coin, who says, why don't I go do the safest thing, the most secure thing, and I'll just keep this safe. I'll let it be. I won't make any waves. And his master comes back and says, you wicked and lazy servant, and throws him out into the farthest darkness. It's a little bit harsh. This isn't usually how we like to think about God. It sounds a little bit more like the fire and brimstone that sometimes we hear about. But then again, it's kind of a good reminder that the fire and brimstone is actually, it's in the Bible, and not just in the Old Testament. But then again, this is what Jesus says to us. He tells it like it is. He doesn't beat around the bush that there are boundaries in our world. There are hard things that we come up against as humans, and it doesn't help anyone to pretend that they're not there. What Jesus does is he says they are, this is real, these difficulties are present, and this world is a harsh one, and I'm going to give you a path through it. I'm going to give you a gospel that will give you the strength and energy and life to walk through this life with a little bit less difficulty, with a little bit less pain. And that's the gift we're given. That's those coins that God entrusts us with. And thank God for that, because the church has long been guilty of burying those treasures that we're given, instead of running out into the world to share them and discover others. I mean, how often have I shied away from saying the hard truth to someone, to digging a little bit deeper with someone because it would be uncomfortable? How often have I respected respectability more than honesty? How often have we valued convenience more than fidelity to this gospel we proclaim? And I sometimes think that Episcopalians might need angry Jesus more than anybody. He might be the one thing that can sort of get us out of our seats and into the streets. I think we need this Jesus who gets frustrated, who says, I cannot believe that y'all disciples don't get this yet. I've said it 100 times. I think we need this Jesus who feels pain, who yells, who gets frustrated. And I think we need this Jesus who feels all of those things, because then maybe it's all right if we feel them as well. I think this is a way of Jesus meeting us in our humanity. He's not just that God person who sails lightly above all of the trials and tribulations of the world. No, he experiences them. He's with us in them. And I think back to what Liam said, and I don't need to remind y'all that what we do here in church is kind of a big deal. Sometimes we get so used to things that we forget that, but think about it. God who created us, who loves us so much, God cares so much for each and every one of us that God comes to be present on the altar, literally present in solidarity with us. God says, whatever's going on in your life, it's not too much for me to handle. Let's hold it together. And you know what? I'm not even just that. I'm going to give you a community. I'm going to give you a group of people who will carry that with you. That's a huge deal in our world that expects us to be self-sufficient all the time. God says, no, you don't have to carry it all on your own. I'm going to give you a community, the church, of people who are figuring it out together, who are honest with one another, or trying to be, about how hard life is. It's a big deal. And maybe we need that passionate Jesus to remind us that this new life in baptism, this community that we're born into, isn't a given. That's a gift every day. And maybe we need this powerful Jesus to remind us that working for the kingdom doesn't stop after we've voted. This powerful Jesus that demands more of us, that says don't bury your treasure in the ground, share it with others, double it, work with it, give it to one another, and multiply it. Maybe we need that alarming, intimidating Jesus to kick us out of our embarrassment about our faith. Oh, maybe others don't want to hear it. Maybe I'm proselytizing. Maybe I'm talking too much about God. Maybe we need that angry Jesus so that we can really get angry, be allowed to be angry about injustice going on across the globe. Maybe if we felt more in solidarity with that Jesus, we'd be able to really live like our lives have been changed. Because Liam's right, this is a big deal. There is love to rely on when ours is spent. There's hope that breathed this world into being. There's a joy that awaits us one day in that coming kingdom. It's a big deal. Death has been conquered. This world is not all there is. Whatever difficulty, pain, loneliness, sadness that you may feel, you're never alone in it. And the tomb is empty. Jesus is here. Good Lord, folks, if ever there was a moment in our lifetimes when the world needed some gospel hope, isn't it now? If ever there was a moment when the world needs a love that costs, this is it. 5 years from now, when we look back at this pandemic, when it ends, and it will end, will we be able to say, our decisions kept our neighbors safe? Will we be able to say, in this trying time, we showed the love of God to people who doubted? We manifested Christ. We lived out Christ's love to one another. Will we be able to say, I loved my neighbors as well as I could, even when it cost? I hope so. No, I know so. And when Jesus comes back to we servants and asks what we did with the treasure of his love, what will we say? What will you say? Go forth into the world and say something.